All right, so let's take you back to Parliament, where the question and answer session with the President has officially come to an end, at least for today. The time has expired, and so that seems to have answered one of the big questions around whether or not the President would be allowed to continue with his response. But of course, many MPs will not necessarily be happy with what has unfolded, especially because many felt the President was evading the question. This is particularly on what happened on his Phala Phala farm in 2020. Athi Mtongana has been watching that session for us. She joins us live from Parliament tonight with the latest. Athi, it's been a turbulent sitting of Parliament. It was off to a dramatic start, I suppose not unexpected, given the fact that the opposition has been saying they're not going to let the President get away with not having to hear about or even account for Phala Phala.
It certainly was expected, Kathy. If you remember the last time that the President was here, there was, of course, this particular push by political parties to get him to respond to issues concerning the Phala Phala farm robbery. But I'm joined by Floyd Shivambu from the EFF, the Chief Whip. Thank you for your time. Now, we understand that the Speaker is saying that the Chief Whips have to meet so that they can make a decision as to how to proceed. Do you feel that even during that session you'll be able to get the Speaker eventually to get the President to respond to issues around Phala Phala?
Now look, in terms of standard parliamentary programming process, is that before we schedule the sitting of the National Assembly, we as Chief Whips, we meet in a Chief Whips forum to deliberate on what is the agenda, what do we shift, what do we prioritize. And then after we agree as Chief Whips of different political parties, we then go to the National Assembly Programming Committee to then formalize the agreements that we would have had. Then the Speaker has now understood and appreciated that there is urgency of completing the question session on the President of the ANC, who couldn't conclude the questions today because he refused to respond to the questions in relation to Phala Phala. And then we are going to then take up that tomorrow in the Chief Whips Forum. And there is unanimity amongst opposition parties that the question session must be constituted as urgent as possible. The next scheduled question session is on the 29th of September. So we're going to make sure tomorrow when we go to the Chief Whips Forum that we schedule the question session to conclude this part as urgent as possible, ideally next week, so that we get clear answers in relation to Phala Phala, because the President is refusing to answer questions in relation to Phala Phala. And it looks like he's not only refusing to answer questions from members of Parliament, he's also refusing to answer questions from the South African Reserve Bank, which has just written us a letter today to say that the first gave him 21 days, he could not respond. They've given him an additional 15 days, he still has not responded. And what is quite apparent from what the Reserve Bank is saying is that Mr. Ramaphosa didn't disclose of the dollars that were found in Phala Phala, because the Reserve Bank's letter is saying that they have asked him to disclose the origins of the foreign currency that was found in his farm, meaning that when those dollars were brought into South Africa, were not declared with the South African Reserve Bank as is required by the foreign currency regulations and the laws that govern the money movements and exchanges in South Africa. So there is already a prima facie violation of the laws and regulations that govern society, that govern South Africa as a whole. He must respond. The reason why he is not responding truthfully and giving us proper answers is because he knows that he has violated the crime, he has violated the laws of this country, he has committed a lot of crimes, and he has involved a lot of other people as well in the commission of these multiple crimes, violations of so many laws of the Republic. And we are not going to back off as Parliament. There is no any other institution that must hold him accountable except Parliament. That is why we demand that he must give us the necessary responses as a matter of urgency.
If even the Reserve Bank is struggling to get responses on time from the President, and if you also look at the Public Protector's Office, which also requested questions, which he then submitted much later than the deadline that was actually given, do you think, and judging with what he has responded to today and what he said, do you think that your push, together with other chief whips of course, will eventually get the President to give details himself without jeopardizing the investigation?
Look, he has got no choice. It's not an issue of choice, by the way. We kept on saying that it is not the choice of the President whether he has to answer to these questions or not. He has to answer. It is an obligation. It's an obligation in terms of the Constitution, in terms of the rules of the National Assembly, that he must answer to the questions that have been posed to him. And if he ignores the South African Reserve Bank as well, the South African Reserve Bank has got all the legislative permissibility to could prosecute him. Like, there are people who have been prosecuted for holding dollars here in South Africa. There's a person who is currently serving a sentence here in the Western Cape for violating foreign currency regulations. So there is prima facie breaking of the law, like of violation of the foreign currency regulations. So the Reserve Bank must not act like Mr. Ramaphosa is above the law. If he refuses to disclose, they must take the necessary steps in the same way they've prosecuted people before. That is the logical route that must be taken. But we as Parliament, we have an obligation to get answers from him, because that is what is required by the Constitution of South Africa. That is what we're elected for. This separation of powers said that the executive will be responsible for allocation of resources and implementation. Ourselves, our primary role is to hold the executive accountable, and to do so, we need them to give us truthful and honest and frank answers at all times. That is why Mr. Ramaphosa must give us the responses. It is also dishonest to say, I cannot answer today, I will answer next week, or I will answer when the Section 89 process begins. Because if you are truthful, if you are not a crook, you must be able to give answers now and repeat the same answer again in whatever time period which you want. So there seems to be something at play now. There seems to be an effort of cover-up that is happening systematically and systemically across different state institutions. And we must never allow that to happen, because that undermines the rule of law, it undermines the laws that govern this country, it undermines the Constitution. And we cannot go anywhere without a foundational Constitution that gives us guidance in terms of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. So the President must be held accountable. He must answer truthfully to the questions before he even incriminates himself further.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. That was a mouthful. We'll leave it there for now, though, Kathy, here in Parliament. And remains to be seen, again, what the Speaker will decide in terms of getting the President to respond to issues pertaining to Phala Phala.
All right, Athi Mtongana, we'll leave it there. You can expect more reflections on the full day's proceedings from Athi throughout the rest of the evening.